Tony Toussaint and I, and these are not in chronological order. Tony Toussaint and I had a job, and we went to Mayfield Yard. This is much later, maybe like a couple of years later or something like that. And we had on loan on the O&W some of those great big 3200s off the New Haven because of our power or some darn thing. I don't know what. Oh, they were an awful hulk of an engine anyway. But we went to Mayfield, and we slept overnight, and we went down about 7 o'clock in the morning in Mayfield Yard to the roundhouse. They called us to go to work. And as we get scraping around there and monkeying around, I'm looking in the firehouse. There's a stream of water coming right down through from the top of the crown sheet. I can't even see where it is, right in front of the door. And I says, Jesus, Tony, take a look at this, will you? He takes a look at it, and he says, gee, I don't know, this engine isn't safe. So we climb down off, and we go over to the roundhouse, and I don't know what the heck the guy's name was, but he said, he argued. He said, hell, you warm it up, you fire it up and get fire in it, that'll take up. And I said, gee, I don't know. I said, I've been around the railroad a while, but I said, gee, here's a man been around the railroad 50 years, and he says it's not safe to go, so I'll go along with him. So they said, all right, go on home. We don't care what you do. So we went back up the ride and hung around for a while and had something to eat. Then we decided to get that train out of there anyway. So we went back down to the hind end, down to Caboose. And we get on there all set to ride to the deadhead to Middletown. And old Puss got failing, I must say so. I mean, I never liked him, but it didn't make any difference. He come down and fiddled around with the stove and so forth and so on. And he says, you men haven't got permission to ride this train. And Tony says, no. I said, no. Well, he says, you can't ride it. You have to get off. Well, how are we going to get to Middletown? He says, I don't know. That's your problem. So we got off. We went back up to the Y, and we stayed all night. So the more I got to thinking about it, the more Tony and I got to talking about it, the madder I got. So we went down to the bus station, and I remember we got the bus to Scranton to Middletown. And we no sooner get in Middletown, of course, and we go to O&W and report on it, and they tell us the superintendent wants to see us. Well, usually in the railroad, if your superintendent wants to see you, you're fired. That's it, period. They don't want nothing. So we went upstairs, and I remember that. And I was so goddamn mad by the time I got there. I guess maybe I'd had a couple of drinks. I don't know whether I had or not, but it doesn't make any difference. As soon as I got in there, and they ushered us in where Mr. Hawk was, we got his secretary and everybody set up there, an Inquisition-like thing. And I didn't give him a chance to open the meeting or anything. I said, Mr. Hawk, before we start, you owe Tony and I $3.29 apiece, and I want the money now. Mr. Hawk says, well, I said, let's get the money business straightened out first. So he made a draft out for us. Cash draft, and I went over to the paymaster and cashed it. $3.29 each to a ride trip. Well, got all settled around, and he said, well, I said, geez, I don't think this is right. Tony said, well, Tony didn't say much. He's an old engineer, and he'd been there around a long time. He'd probably seen a lot more of that stuff than I had. Of course, I knew, and I didn't know anything. I say fairly knew anyway. But anyway, I said, I don't think there's anything right about that. I said, that engine wasn't right, and if the man 50 years of experience, for God's sake, says an engine isn't right, the road foreman hasn't got, or the roundhouse foreman hasn't got any tell him the right to take it. Now, the roundhouse foreman told me, he says, go out and warm it up, and that thing will take up. And I says, I don't believe it. And Tony didn't think so either. So he says, that was it. So it went on. I went downstairs. I went into the dispatcher's office, or crew dispatcher's office. I said, how do I stand? He said, well, you're off the board. And I said, for what? And he says, you and Tony both. And I said, well, I don't think that's right. So I went right back upstairs, and I said, Mr. Hawk, I says, what's this about my being off the board? What for? And he says, you go back downstairs. You're on the board, all right. So I went back down, the crew dispatcher put us back on the board. And he says, you're called this afternoon for extra hostler. And I said, okay, what, 2:30 or something like that. So I went up the roundhouse. And, of course, Scuttlebutt gets around, and a guy by the name of Filer. And I don't know what the conductor was. What happened is the roundhouse foreman went out and warmed the engine up and put a fire in it so they wouldn't notice it. And maybe it did take up, maybe it didn't. I don't know. I never did find a fireman, or I would have questioned him. But I went to work anyway that afternoon, and Harold Freer was the roundhouse foreman, and I was up there putting engines in on a put and taking them over and getting ash dumped on them and all sorts of things that you do when you're a hostler, inside hostler. And so I was wandering around the roundhouse there, and I see this 32, whatever it was, 3258 or something like that, on a pit, deader than, you know, what they say, with the water running in it and everything, you know, cold. So I said, well, I started to climb up on it. Just as I started to climb up on it, and, Harold Furrow says, Ted, don't go up on that engine. And I said, why not? He says, I have orders to keep you off that engine. So I kept off of the engine. So I didn't say I want to get in trouble with Harold. I knew him pretty well. But later on, I found out that before they got to Point Al, which is the top of the hill from Mayfield to Kenosha, they had to dump that engine. They were afraid it was going to blow up. And I don't know, like something like 52 ground sheet bolts were leaking or some darn thing. Anyway, but that's the end of that story.